You're listening to a special edition of We Get Work, recorded live from Workplace Horizons 2025 in New York City, Jackson Lewis's annual labor and employment law conference. Over 500 representatives from 260 companies gathered together to share valuable insights and best practices on workplace law issues impacting their business today. Here's your personal invitation to get the insights from the conference delivered directly to you. We'll see you in 2026. Good morning, Chris Anderson. We're here live from Workplace Horizons 2025. Welcome to the podcast studio. How are you this morning?
Great. Thanks, Alicia. I appreciate it. Glad to be here.
Well, you are a principal in the Greenville, South Carolina office at Jackson Lewis. Can you tell us a little bit about your practice and what in particular you're really working on these days with clients?
Absolutely. So my practice is all about helping U.S. employers, mainly U.S. employers. It can be employers really in other countries as well. But our bread and butter is U.S. employers with engaged people outside the U.S. That can be employees, consultants, using employers of record to engage personnel, and all the attendant issues with that. So it's global employment, start to finish, the whole life cycle. We help clients solve problems in over 100 countries. So I'm part of a practice group called the International Employment Practice Group. John Sanders, our leader, along with Minnie Fu, and then we'll have a growing team within that group to solve problems for U.S. and other clients as well.
Sounds like a lot of people in a lot of companies.
Right.
The title of your presentation here at Workplace Horizons is, and I have to read it, Navigating a Ramped Up EU Workplace Regulatory Landscape as the U.S. Moves in an Opposite Direction. That's a lot of words. Can you share with our listeners just a brief summary, maybe briefer than the title, but a brief summary of what your presentation is about?
Absolutely. Really, if you distill it down, is just for employers who are either headquartered in the U.S. or headquartered in the EU and have an affiliate or a branch in the U.S., how do you balance between what is increasingly becoming a highly regulated environment in the EU versus an increasingly deregulated environment in the U.S. under President Trump's second term?
So balance sounds like a pretty difficult word right now, given everything that's going on. How did you interpret that balance to create your presentation? How did it come out? What did you discuss?
So really it's being willing to, what I'm seeing right now with clients, Alicia, is that clients are when they have operations in both areas, they're kind of having a head swivel in a way where I was with my daughter at a tennis match a few weeks ago where I live, and we were watching the match, and all of a sudden she's 8 years old. She started laughing out loud, and I said, "What are you laughing at, Anna Grace?" And she said, "Well, look across at the other people on the other side." And of course their heads were swiveling as the ball went back and forth, one way and then the other. And I do feel like employers that have operations in both are having that kind of a moment of trying to keep up with what President Trump and the administration are doing, and then also look at what the EU is doing as well. And it could be other countries outside the EU. But for the focus on my presentation, it's the EU versus the US. And the good news is, let's start with the good. The good news is that it's not as drastic as you might think on first blush. The EU has put in place regulations called directives that then have to be implemented by each member country. And those directives, seem onerous, and they are in many ways onerous in terms of diversity, in terms of ESG, environmental, social, and governance regulations. And there are some things that employers should be aware of within that, have to be aware of. But there's also been a pullback on the EU side just recently where they're slowing down the clock on some of those things. And so they're not going to come into effect as quickly. So employers can slow down the head swivel a little bit and take a moment. And that was a theme that came out in day one of the conference was just this idea of needing to be patient, not to be inactive, but to be patiently active and proactive and thinking through before you jump, before you make the move, because it's not just legal compliance. It's what are the stakeholders' demands, what's our reputation in the marketplace, talent retention, talent acquisition, all of those things need to go in there, of course, with compliance being paramount. But just taking that moment to look and see. And now we have a moment where there is a stop of the clock on the EU side.
So you spoke about the fact that people need to kind of just take a step back, let the dust settle. And I'm assuming that's probably what we would normally tell employers when they're faced with a lot of regulatory change, right? Let's wait and see what happens before we jump in necessarily with 2 feet. So how does that kind of practice or practicing patient affect what's happening in the EU and those specific issues you might have covered during your presentation?
Yeah, absolutely. And so the directives themselves are related to ESG. That's what the Stop the Clock directive, the stopping the clock relates to. There's other directives in the EU that I also am talking about as well. But but the focus here with the Stop the Clock is on these directives related to ESG, which is environmental, social, and governance regulations. And so the ESG specific directives, and for employers, we're focused on the S of ESG, and that's the social. And those directives that came out in the last few years in Europe led to a lot of clients, U.S. clients and otherwise, asking questions of, am I implicated by this? Will I have to report? Will I have to do due diligence? What does that look like? And so there's 2 directives. One is the CSRD, is the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, and the other is the CSDDD, which is the Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence Directive. And so those are big names, but really what they if you boil it down, what they're saying is employers in the EU and even other employers outside the EU that are implicated will have to report and or do due diligence when the time comes to do that. And so to stop the clock, employers were worried about that and thinking, what will this mean? What will this mean for us? How much diligence will we have to do? What will satisfy? And there was not a lot of clarity. So employers were rightly asking questions, and that was everything from the social side of diversity and inclusion to health and safety to even union and workplace issues as well, labor issues. And so we were starting to field questions on that. And so the Stop the Clock directive really came at a great time because it allows employers to take a moment and think about what does the directive say, but also now we have some more time to be ready for it. And what we're finding is that when you look at the directive and what the 2 directives and what they say, they're asking for a lot, and there's going to be revisions that are going to come in the next few months. And all this is happening in real time, and that's all going to between now and the end of the year. There'll be some revisions on the substance of the reporting, and so that's going to be good. It's going to be very welcome to have it. But as it stands now, what you'll really have to do is report on your initiatives. But that doesn't mean you're violating U.S. law when you do that or violating EU law. None of that, none of the directives require any kind of proactive or positive discrimination. They don't require companies to do certain things. We're certain now that U.S. companies that are implicated in the directives, when it comes time to report, will be able just to show that they are being compliant with U.S. law and that their European parent or subsidiaries are being compliant as well, and that that's going to be sufficient. But again, there's going to be a lot of changes. So even with that piece, we can kind of wait and see now for the next 6 to 8 months to see what happens with it.
So compliance is always the name of the game. And for companies that have global operations, they're also dealing with federal law changes and probably state law changes. So how is Jackson Lewis helping those employers to handle all of the issues that you just spoke about and, quite frankly, all of the uncertainty?
So as has come up a lot at Workplace Horizons, we have lots of U.S. employment experts who are dealing with every aspect of President Trump, the administration, how the first 100 days now plus have been, and all the outworkings of that. So obviously we're helping in that way, but then helping clients to find the balance between that deregulation and then how they can comply in the EU and other countries around the world that we work in as well. But just helping to figure out the balance between them so that clients don't have a panic moment, but really just get back to a proactive mindset of, okay, I'm going to wait and see, but I'm also going to read we definitely recommend clients to read the directives as they stand now and then be ready, when there's new substantive requirements that come out, and they're aimed to simplify it. The whole point is to simplify. And so just we'll wait and see on that. Just to give a few highlights that I focused on at the event, the timing has now been delayed by 2 years. So obviously a welcome thing for employers because it was going to come into effect basically next financial year and then have to start reporting. Now that's not till 2027 financial year reporting in 2028 for in the EU. So now everything's pushed back. Now everything is pushed back to 2028, and so obviously there's a great bit of time, and that's for the CSRD. And then for CSDDD, nothing starts till 2028 either now, and so there's a lot of time. I won't say yes to all the time in the world. Things happen, but and clients should obviously be aware. But it gives you that clear moment to say, okay, we're not gonna panic on this. We're gonna wait and see what the new directive says, how it gets simplified. So and then also in terms of along with the timing. Now, it used to be that if you had more than 250 employees, you were considered a large employer in the EU, and you would have to comply and report. And now that's if you have greater than 1,000 employees. So that's a huge point for European employers, and then for U.S. companies that have European subsidiaries that could be seen as a large employer in the EU. Now we know that 1,000 threshold will be there.
And I am sure, Chris, that you are reading the directives. And if anybody has a question about it, they can call you and you will help them out. So I want to thank you for stopping by the podcast studio today here at Workplace Horizons, and enjoy the rest of the conference.
Thanks so much. Good to be with you.
Thank you for listening to Jackson Lewis's podcast, We Get Work. Focused solely on workplace issues, it is our job to help employers develop proactive strategies, strong policies, and business-oriented solutions to cultivate a workforce that is engaged and stable. Please tune into our next program, where we will continue to tell you not only what's legal, but what is effective. We Get Work is available to stream and subscribe on your streaming platform of choice, including Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube. For more information on today's topic, our presenters, and other Jackson Lewis resources, visit jacksonlewis.com. As a reminder, this material is provided for informational purposes only. It is not intended to constitute legal advice, nor does it create a client-lawyer relationship between Jackson Lewis and any recipient.